ruthless.
What was your opinion on the people protesting the war?
At the time, despicable. At the time it was going on, the older I got, the more I thought that that was absolutely despicable that people would protest against our military. Love it or hate it, like it or not, agree with the war or not, it was still somebody's mother, brother, daughter, son, whatever, that was fighting over there. And you don't have to show support of the war, but you can show support of the people who participated in the war. Because a lot of them were there not because they wanted to, but because they were drafted and they were there and that's what they were doing. They weren't necessarily fighting for everybody else, they were fighting to keep each other alive.
What did they say about the war in your school?
High school or college?
High school and college.
High school, it was kind of a 50-50. You know, the people that were attention getters were like, oh, we shouldn't be in this war. Although they really didn't understand why or why not. There's, you know, the other percentage of the school was in support of it because we all knew too many people that were over there doing that. Even if you were younger, even when the war first broke out, and you know, I was, what, 10? I mean, still, you saw it every night. I mean, you sat down to dinner every night in front of the TV, and a black and white TV, and you watched either that or the riots, one or the other. I mean, you know, there was severe protests against the war. As the war grew on, it got longer and longer. Then you started to see more and more people really anti-war, just because people were dying and they didn't know why we were over there.
As the war progressed, did your attitude change and why? From the time it first began to the end?
Yeah, and it changed not from the sense of the war. It changed in the sense that I didn't like the way we were fighting war. I mean, there's no gray area. War is a war. It's brutal, it's ugly, it's nasty, it's horrific, it's something you never want to be involved in. But at that point in time, I felt like we were trying to be too nice in that war. We were, you know, obviously you cared about the civilians, but your enemy wasn't caring about the civilians. You know, there's things going on there that you think, you know, why can't we just end this? I mean, why can't we just bomb Hanoi and be done with it? Why can't do, you know, there's too many rules. We're trying to fight a war with way too many rules instead of just going in, fighting a war, winning it, and getting out. And we'd have been out 3 years earlier, but we couldn't.
Were you afraid of getting drafted?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You know, it was one of those situations where it was going to mess up my plans. You know, I knew what I wanted to do, and yeah, I was. You know, I wasn't afraid of the fact that you're going to have to do that. You know, I mean, obviously, nobody wants to go to war, and nobody wants to. You know, if the military is not your own personal career path, then obviously it's not something you want to do. You know, I didn't really want to get drafted. I didn't want to go to the war, but it wouldn't have meant by any stretch of imagination I would have taken off to Canada or anything else. I mean, yeah, I would have served if I'd have been drafted. But yeah, when you get up and run across the commons at your college to find out where your number is on the board, on the big draft board, and every one of us were like, whew, even though college students were a lot less apt to get drafted than the normal person on the street.
What were some of the major events you remember during the Vietnam War?
Tet. The Tet Offensive was huge, and that was, you know, Tet being the Vietnamese holiday, at which, at that point, I think it was the eye-opener for our military. I think when the Tet Offensive hit, suddenly our military realized these guys are a lot more organized than we thought, because it wasn't just the Viet Cong. It wasn't, you know, it was both Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, and it wasn't just here. It was all the major cities in Vietnam were attacked simultaneously. And suddenly, when that hit, that was huge. Obviously, Fall of Saigon was gigantic. I mean, that's obviously more in my mind because at the end of the war, and I was 20 years old when that happened, pretty much. But, you know, there was so many, My Lai Massacre, when Lieutenant William Calley was accused of basically massacring a Vietnamese village, civilian village. Eventually, he was found guilty. But yeah, that was another huge one. You know, all those major battles that you kind of read about in history books. I remember when they were broadcast on TV. I mean, whether it was the Battle of Hue or the Central Province, the Central Highlands, that kind of thing. I remember all those. I mean, I remember watching those on TV. It was scary.
What was your opinion on communism, and were you afraid of it?
Yeah, I was afraid of it. I was naive enough to think it would never come to the United States. I was naive enough to think that, you know what, we're the greatest country on the face of the earth. There's no way we're going to permit communism in our country. And, and I still feel that way. I still do. I wasn't so much afraid of communism, but I thought the communists had a way of forcing their ideals and their ideology down to another populace. And I think that's exactly what's going on in Vietnam. And I think if the communists had left it alone, it probably would have been less of an issue. But suddenly when the Communist Party started to back the North Vietnamese regulars, that's when the gloves came off and it became a nasty war.
Did you believe that we needed to enter Vietnam?
Boy, there's your money question right there. That's a serious question. Yes, I did. And in the same token, you look at our country now, and over the last handful of years, do we need to intervene in some of the countries in Asia or in the Middle East? Do we need to be over there? Do we need to be in Iraq? Do we need to be in Afghanistan? Kind of almost parallel there. Do we need to be intervening? Who are we fighting for? In the U.S., I think our ego got a little bit the better of us for that, because obviously we're the greatest country on earth. And suddenly we didn't want somebody to get pushed around by communists. And at the time, the communist whole scare, the McCarthyism and the whole scare of communism was just rife through the country. And suddenly it was like, we got to stem the flow of communism. It's going to continue to go. And looking back on it now, I don't know if it would ever actually spread regardless, but I never really thought actually that it was something we were going to have to deal with. And believe me, we did atom bomb drills in school. Under the desk, hands over your heads, on your knees. I mean, yeah, we did those. We didn't do tornado drills. We did atom bomb drills in the hallways. So yeah, but you're just naive enough to think, nah, it's just not going to happen here. Didn't like it. Didn't like what it stood for. But I think if without the communism, we wouldn't have been in that situation either.
Did your parents support the war?
Mm-hmm. My dad was former military, former World War II. I mean, he was a fighter pilot in World War II. And yeah, he was fully in support, and he was high school principal. Our superintendent, we had a new superintendent that came in the year after Kent State in '72 maybe. And Mr. Smith was the superintendent at Kent High School. So he was, you listen to him talk about the Kent State fiasco, and that's from somebody who was there, who lived in Kent, Ohio, who was, who saw the whole thing, basically was involved, from a distance, but yet he was living in Kent and saw the whole population. So, yeah, I mean, suddenly you got a whole different flavor of it. But, yeah, I mean, my parents were supportive. I mean, and my parents were also part of that generation of, World War II people, too, I mean, like I said, my dad was probably in his early 20s, 21 in World War II. My uncle, his brother, who's older than him by a year, he was in it. I had 4 great uncles who were all in World War II. So that generation was geared to protecting the U.S. and protecting our democracy. But Vietnam was a different war.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really was a different war.
If you were involved in any anti-war activities, what were your actions?
We did, in college, we were involved with several different types of demonstrations, but they were more geared to not anti-war. They were more geared to trying to support the troops in a situation, like that. And you had guys coming back from the war. They'd served. When I was a sophomore in college, great example, a guy by the name of Bill Wenger, and I can remember his name, and that's a bazillion years ago, but I remember Bill very well. He was about 2 or 3 years older than everybody else. Came out of Vietnam, did his tour of duty, did 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, used the GI Bill to go to college. Was, older than everybody else, but wanted to play football, on the football team, and I was playing football. And I remember we were on the practice field. We have a huge, huge practice field at Second Valley. We were on the practice field one day. A thunderstorm rolls in from, the other side of the practice field. You hear this big crack of thunder. Well, Bill hit the ground, arms over his head, assumed position, incoming. And we're all ducking. You know how you react when you hear big, loud, unexpected crack. He's on the ground. To him, that was incoming artillery. He acted automatically. And we're standing around, 100 of us on a football team. The coach had called us up because he knew a storm was coming in. He called us up, was getting ready to send us in. And all of a sudden he hits the ground, and Bill gets up, and I remember him getting up and looking real sheepish, like semi-embarrassed. And this is a guy that walked point. He was a platoon sergeant for the Marines. He walked the point on patrol. So he was in one of the worst, most dangerous spots he could be in for 2 years. And he was on the ground. He gets up and he looked all embarrassed and sheepish. He goes, "Man, I'm sorry, guys." And we're all like, "Are you kidding me?" I mean, at that point in time, it drove in really graphically. This is serious. I mean, these people are going to suffer from this after the war too, because he was. I mean, no, he didn't. He probably had a degree of PTSD, but just that automatic instinct of a thunderstorm making him think he was in an artillery barrage and he's on the ground. Yeah, all of us poor, naive individuals were like, "Crap, this is real," and it was scary.
What was your opinion? While you were in college, were you afraid of incidents like Kent State and other things going on with the riots?
No and yes. No from the students that were on campus, yes from the people that were coming in from off campus. A lot of the problems that were happening on campuses were being started by people that, the best way to describe them, they're professional protesters. I mean, they would show up on college campuses in buses. They had nothing. I mean, like Kent State deal. A lot of people that were on campus weren't even students. They weren't even residents of Kent, Ohio. They were there. So, I was more concerned that there was going to be outside factors influencing what was going on. But, I had friends at OU when Ohio University got shut down because of protesters, and they'd come on and they had, a truck full of, half bricks, and they said, "Hey, grab a handful of bricks and let's go." And they weren't students, they weren't residents, they were just instigating riots. Mm-hmm. So no, I wasn't so much worried about that because I think the people on campus were all pretty cool. I was just worried about all of a sudden you start getting these outside, influences starting to work their way in, and suddenly it was going to get crazy. It never happened though. It was cool.
I'd just like to say thank you to Mr. Midlum for helping me, and then that's the end of my video.
Thank you much.